So I think we've gone live. It's hard to tell if anyone can sort of hear or see us, but maybe if someone could respond in chat as to whether you can see us.
Hey everyone.
Hello.
Hi.
Thanks. Sorry for the sort of delay in getting started. A few technical issues starting with this new platform, but hopefully it's going to be sort of smooth sailing from here on out. So thanks very much for joining us, everyone. And thanks obviously to our esteemed panel as well, who we'll introduce in just a minute. First, I'm Chris, one of the founders of Penfold. We're a pension provider for the self-employed. Our mission is to help the 5 million and fast-growing self-employed community in the UK get to a position where they can actually stop working one day. So by building up a pension that they can live off. But we know there's obviously a lot more to money than just pensions, and it's only when you've sorted your day-to-day finances that you can start thinking about saving for the future. As it's Talk Money Week, a week of huge importance, particularly for the self-employed community, who all too often get a raw deal when it comes to finances and managing your money. So we've brought together some of our existing customers who also happen to be champions in talking openly about money matters, particularly amongst the self-employed, to talk about the importance of financial future-proofing when you're self-employed. So quick plug before we get started, that anyone signing up to Penfold today will give you £25 into your account just to get started. If you follow the link that should be in chat, or just enter the code Talk Money when you start. So first things first, love you to introduce you to our guests today. We've got Sian, Lara, and Claire. They're all Penfold customers and are working with us to spread the word about pensions. But before that, and more importantly than that, they've all cultivated incredible communities talking more prominently about finance. So thanks very much for joining us today. It would be great if you could all tell us a little bit about yourselves and your communities and how you got started, really. So maybe Claire, if we could start with you. Your journey started with an anonymous Instagram account. What made you decide to do that?
First of all, I think we might have lost Lara, so I think we might need to add her back in.
I'll handle that while you go.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so I have a real checkered past when it comes to money, and I think that's probably something, I think the idea of Talk Money Week is brilliant because it gets us talking about finance, but I think the sort of unspoken thing about that is that we have to talk about when it goes wrong as well as when it goes right. So up until March 2019, I had a really, really difficult relationship with money. I had never quite got it. I always knew that I was quite bright and I managed responsibilities in other areas of my life really pretty well, but money was just something that I never had got to grips with. And that in combination with kind of some big life milestones quite early on. So I had my first child when I was 25, I got married at 28. And it culminated in a really, really difficult financial situation. And I reached a sort of breaking point in March of last year when I was dealing with an ever-growing amount of sort of consumer debt and trying to plug all of these holes in my budget, and it just wasn't working. So I mean, I can't for the life of me really remember why I decided to start an Instagram account about it. But I had noticed more people sort of opening up about money on Instagram and a bit of a community growing, which has obviously exploded in the last year. And it sort of gave me a bit of confidence to start talking more honestly about my relationship with money. And I didn't ever really expect it to grow into the community that it did. I felt really alone in my own kind of difficult financial situation. And so I thought I'd probably get a sort of handful of followers who might shout at me if I spent too much on lattes or whatever. But actually the message seemed to really resonate with people. And it's been very sort of mutually beneficial, growing a community of people talking kind of honestly and with some emotional intelligence about money and treating it as kind of in the context of everyday life rather than just as like a separate entity.
Yeah, that's great. And so, Sian, you're a seasoned freelancer, very much known as the queen of newsletters. You've amassed a huge following for freelance writing jobs. How did you get started with that?
I started, just want to check I'm off mute, hang on. I started the newsletter after a really terrible 6 months of freelancing. I've been a writer for over a decade, and there was something about, I think it was 2017, which was brutally hard for freelancers, and no one I spoke to could really put their finger on why it was difficult. But I realized that one of the issues, apart from kind of pitching and doing all the things you usually do, I knew that so many of the freelance jobs I was looking for were hidden in jobs boards that were aimed at full-time writers. And when you have to do all of that searching, and then when you do finally find one and then find out that it's unpaid, you're spending hours a day without a job, without any leads, and it was just crushing. It's really exhausting to have to do that work. And at the time I launched freelance writing jobs, there wasn't a single platform for freelance writing jobs. So I made my own. And that was while I was supposed to be writing my dissertation. I was at university at the time doing my MA, and it was the worst time for me to start doing something like that, but I couldn't not do it, and I set it up while my husband was in the pub just to see how long it would take me to write one, and it just took off. It's grown so much and so quickly, and I think it's changing the way the media industry approaches freelance writers. I only feature jobs that are paid. I only feature jobs that are well paid if I can get more information about that. So I have a threshold that I won't go under. I won't feature anything for national minimum wage or even London living wage, because I think for a writer, you deserve to be paid more. And it's a really lovely community. And now I'm writing a book called The Pyjama Myth, which will hopefully be out next year. It's a book that was crowdfunded largely because of the newsletter community, and it's a freelance writing survival guide, but it's much more about, it's not just about here's how to write an invoice or here's how to send a pitch. It's much more about what success means to people as a freelance writer. And I think now that's so wrapped up in finances. And I think success as a freelancer isn't just financial success, there's more to it. So I've been exploring that for the last few months, and it's really great.
Fantastic, thank you. And Lara, Found and Flourish continues to grow from strength to strength, especially with the incredible tools and events you offer your female founder community. How did you get it off the ground? Can you tell us a bit more about it?
Oh, thank you so much, Chris. Thanks for letting me back in. Thanks for having me. And it's super inspirational to hear Sian and Claire's story as well. I love the focus on community, which I feel has been a really big part of both of your journeys. So that's really lovely to hear. So yeah, Found and Flourish is a female founders online membership community, media and events platform. I know it sounds like a lot, but we started off with in real life events, and actually pivoted during lockdown to provide more resources online. And we now have an online membership and run online events and provide resources for women in business. So our mission is to empower women in business to found and flourish. So whether you've got an idea that you want to get off the ground, you're a freelancer and you're incredibly lonely doing it on your own, or you run a business and that can also be incredibly lonely, even if you've got a team of people, because I think the kind of challenges you go through as an entrepreneur or business owner can feel very isolating. So the idea of Found and Flourish came about, well, I'll start off before then. So I worked in the media industry for about 10 years and I decided to go freelance in 2016 when I had a massive burnout. Didn't recognize who I was incredibly depressed, and decided that it was better to walk away from the industry and actually not know where I was going to get my next paycheck from than continue another week in a job that I was in. It was a really toxic environment and clearly I was desperate. And within the month, I decided to start training, and I set up my own consultancy within social media and ran that for a couple of years. Absolutely loved it, but felt so incredibly lonely because it was the first time I'd been self-employed. I had to look after my finances. I had to wear 10 different hats. I also didn't really couldn't find a community that I could necessarily relate to, where I could look at them online or look at their events and go that they're my kind of people. And I knew there were my kind of people out there, but I didn't know where to find them. And the idea for Found and Flourish came about when I had my son, and he was about 3 months old, and I was thinking, you know, I want to get back to work at some point, and I was really excited at the prospect of working for myself again, but I didn't want to work by myself. And a little bit like Sian, you know, I looked for a community, couldn't quite find one that felt like my kind of place. So I decided to create one, and that's where the idea of Found and Flourish came about. So what started off as a newsletter has kind of really lovely sort of developed and evolved over the last couple of years to be what we are today.
That's great. Yeah, I think one of the best things that we found from building a product and the service for the self-employed community is we found so many of these amazing support groups and networks and communities out there. When you're self-employed and you don't have, you know, an HR team or a finance team to help you with all of this stuff, you rely on those in your network to help you, and it's so great to see so many of them, and particularly the three that we're talking about today.
Yeah.
So yeah,
and there are so many now. Yeah, so it's brilliant.
Yeah, exactly. So it's obviously Talk Money Week. We're starting to see huge inroads with people talking more openly about their finances and how important it is to manage them properly. You've each had your own experiences in this, as you've sort of mentioned in your intros, and you also encourage your communities to do the same. Why do you think it's an important conversation to have, to talk about your finances and to talk about them openly? Perhaps if we start with Claire.
Yeah, I think it's such a British thing to clam up when money's mentioned. And I've said this a couple of times. I think in Alex Holder's book, she says that when you're at university or when you're like a new graduate, it's very acceptable to be broke all the time and to sort of talk about being irresponsible with money. So, you know, it's fine to talk about using the last 20 quid of your overdraft on Jaeger bombs. Like, that's acceptable then. And it feels like there's more of a sort of level playing field. Obviously, financial inequality exists at university, but I think there's more of an acceptance that sort of, it's the assumption that everybody's living skin while they're at university. And then when you embark on your separate career paths, all of a sudden it becomes very, very obvious whose parents are going to gift them a house deposit, who's chosen a career that's going to pay them really well, you know, who's sort of going to start saving for X, Y, and Z as soon as they start their job, and these gaps start to open up, and then it becomes increasingly difficult to talk about money with your peers without creating some kind of hierarchy. So I think in talking about money, we have to kind of accept that money is one of a few different currencies that we have in our life, like our health, you know, our relationships, and try.
Oh, she's paused slightly.
She's paused. We'll give her a second more and then maybe move on. Okay, perhaps if we move on to you, Lara, if you had anything to add there.
Yeah, of course. So I think personally, I've definitely been on my own financial journey, and I can actually relate to a lot of what Claire was saying. I think from my perspective, especially looking at the general inequalities, you know, I've been doing some research more recently because it's Let's Talk Money Week, and we're also running a money panel next month. Hi, Claire, are you back? Oh, she might have frozen it again. Yeah, and I saw the statistic. So women fare worse than men across all areas of financial well-being, according to research from Close Brothers. That was in the FT. And I think it's such an important conversation to have, and it's not one we're ever really encouraged to have as children growing up. Even at school or being a young child, you're told not to talk about money, not to ask about it. It's rude. I remember taking a job in media as a director, and I was asked by my boss to not talk about my salary with my male counterparts and peers. And it is taboo because people treat it that way, and they treat it like a sordid, almost like dirty word, money. And I think as more women are starting businesses, more women are trying to juggle. Oh, there's a bit of an echo. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
So more women are juggling, kids and businesses. They're also taking on main carer responsibility. So they're also taking, they're probably more responsible for the money that's spent in the household as well. And we're earning less, and we're saving less in pensions. There are 1,000 reasons why it's so important to be talking about it. And so creating environments where, you can obviously build communities like Clare has done around money, or attend events and listen to people speak about it, or generally just having it as part of the day-to-day conversation, because it hasn't been over, however, it has never been. So I think it's a really important time to be talking about it, especially now that we've got so much transparency around the disparities and the inequalities and the gender pay and debt gap that we're experiencing.
Yeah, absolutely. And Sian, I'm interested to hear sort of from your experience as well, and within your community about the conversation.
I really resonate a lot with what both Lara and Clare have said, particularly the struggles that Clare talks about with money. I've had similar, and there is a deep shame to it, which you can only get over if you talk about it, and if it becomes the norm. From the outside looking in, freelancers, and I've felt particularly successful as a freelancer over the last couple of years. My business has taken off. I'm doing really well. I run my own sites and my own newsletters, but I didn't have a pension until earlier this year. I've only got my savings together in the last 3 years, and here I am writing a book about freelancing and feeling like an absolute imposter, because actually I'm not great at money. And it's that real push and pull with what I guess how we define success, but also what we're comfortable with. And it's just this assumption that people are naturally good with money, which is so damaging, because nobody taught me how to budget when I was at university. And then I got given 20 grand, and you can imagine how that went. And once you have a very difficult relationship with money, it's very hard to get out of that. But if you can't talk about it, and you can't wrestle this idea that you can be successful and still bad with money, it's a really difficult thing. So you hide it. And I would rather talk about that really great commission I got, rather than the fact that really great commission paid the interest on a credit card. And it doesn't anymore, but it took me a really, really long time to get out of that cycle. And it's the shame that comes with that, whether it's an internal or something that society kind of puts that pressure on us, is really hard to deal with. And the more we talk about it, the less people will feel like that.
Yeah, totally agree. And I suppose if we're just thinking about pensions, maybe if I come back to you, Lara, what made you start to think seriously about saving for the long term and into a pension? And do you think there's enough education out there around the importance of having one?
Yeah, so I'll answer your second question first. I don't think there's enough education around it. Claire's ready to be let back in, by the way, Chris.
Cool.
There's definitely not enough education around it. I think there's an increasingly amount of education, but the reason why I have a real big focus around money and empowering women financially within our community is because so many women, including myself until the beginning of this year, so similar to Sian, didn't have a pension. Now, I remember being interviewed in a job in the media industry.
Oh, that's new.
I remember going for an interview and I asked, do you have a pension scheme? And they said, oh no, we just encourage our employees to earn enough money to put a deposit on a house. That's our pension.
Wow.
And
Nice.
I was like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe that makes sense, because I didn't even know how pensions worked. And of course, with the compound interest and the fact that you get kickback basically from the government every time you put in, it just makes so much sense to have a pension. And because I didn't even understand the basics, I couldn't say, well, actually, I disagree with that, and you should have a pension because you've got nearly 100 people in your company and it's just the right thing to do. So I think education is really key. And why did I set up a pension? I decided to take myself seriously. I decided that my future was inevitable, and my mum very much relied on my dad financially, but only because my dad relied on my mum to look after me and my 3 sisters. However, my mum didn't anticipate my dad leaving her and moving countries and remarrying and not sharing his pension pot with her. So I've seen firsthand, the impact of assuming you're going to be looked after by someone else. And although I have a husband and a secure marriage, I would hate to assume that his pension is my pension. So we're planning our future together, but I'm very much focused on trying to build my own future, even if it's starting small and at zero, because that feels good for me. And I think also becoming a mum, I've just decided to be a bit more adult. And that's one of the things that I needed to do to be a bit more adult.
Yeah, I think that's a really important message around sort of, unfortunately, you need to look after number one. You need to build, look out for your family, of course, but absolutely. And there's a bit of a myth. Sorry, just you for a second there, Claire. There's a bit of a myth that even the government might support you when you get to retirement age, and unfortunately, that's not really true. There is a state pension, but it's about £9,000, and so most people find that they'll probably need more than that to live comfortably when they retire. So you really do need to build up a private pension. Perhaps if I move onto you, Sian, what prompted you to open a pension?
It was once I had paid off my credit card debt. Once I'd built my own pot of savings, because I was, similar to Lara, very conscious of having someone else's money, and I got married last year, and suddenly my financial position changed as a result. And I was just like, this is weird. I've always worked for my own money, and now I've got extra money that isn't mine, and it's a very, very strange thing to kind of wrestle with. And I hadn't set up a pension because I really like being able to see my money. And it was something that I really struggled with when it's in my savings account, which is going towards buying a house. I know where it is, I can see it, and I can add to it. Crucially, I can take money out. And when you have a pension, it's so far in the future that it's very difficult to kind of imagine what you're setting up. And there was a question in the little question box that I saw from someone who said that they were feeling guilty because they hadn't set one up and they were 40. And I was 38 yesterday. I turned 38. It was my birthday. And I totally get that guilt where you feel like you are never going to save enough money to have the life that you want when you've retired. And I think it's so important just to realize that all you can do is save what you can save from today. That's all you can fix. I can't feel guilty that I didn't start a pension when I was 21 because I was busy, spending my last £20 of my overdraft on Jaeger bombs. So it's you just start, and it's honestly, I was really proud when I did. I sat there, I was reading, playing around on the internet in bed on a Saturday morning, and then just went, I'm going to set up a pension, and 10 minutes later I'd done it. And I think Con was reading a book at the time, and it felt incredibly empowering to just do that with my own money without really kind of thinking more about it. And it was my choice, and that was great.
Yeah, it can be quite daunting when you think about pension, because often you're talking about really large sums of money when you look at sort of pension calculators and things, and it can be quite scary when you're just starting. But you're absolutely right that the only thing you can really control is how much you can put away today, and that's what you need to be thinking about.
I think the pension calculators I've used were actually really, they made me feel a lot worse, because they make me feel very guilty when they say it's just like, to live the life you want, you need to be saving £500 a month, and I'm just there, some months I don't make £500, so that really odd thing of just feeling like what you're doing isn't enough. And that's, if you're told it makes you feel like there's no point in starting, and I think that's a really damaging thing.
Yeah, totally. And Claire, how about you? What prompted you to open a pension and start saving?
Okay. Right. Can you hear me?
I think we're having some problems with Claire's sound, or one more second. You try again.
Right, can you hear me? Brilliant.
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay. When I was trying to log back in, when it kicked me out before, it had opened 2 separate windows. So thank you so much. Whoever said, is it open on 2 devices? Because that was the problem. So I, up until last August, had always been employed. And I grew up in a household where kind of my mum and my stepdad owned a business together. So things were always, it was always a real ebb and flow, and never a feeling of security, really. And I've talked to my mum about her pension. There's a really big gap from when she left her local authority job to start her business, and then when she was employed again. And it sort of really put me off ever being self-employed, because I felt like that precariousness wasn't something that I wanted to live with. But then after sort of realizing that actually my future was going to be self-employed, and leaving a job that was making me sort of very, very unhappy, in order to sort of pursue this new opportunity that had opened up, I've had to then think about all of the reasons why I hadn't wanted that. So the precariousness, not having security for the future, and do what I could to combat that, one of which is having a pension. And I think that, you know, what Lara was saying before about sort of, you know, when you're in a marriage and you're sort of, you know, you're sharing your finances, but actually you can never be so secure. You know, my husband is employed and has a workplace pension, and I didn't want to be reliant on that after I decide to stop working. And I think also when you're freelance, sort of, when do you make the decision that you're going to stop working and retire as well? And I know that for me, if I didn't have a security blanket of, you know, a decent pension, that I could see myself working until I was like 80, just to keep things going. And I didn't want that, you know. I don't think that's what anyone wants for their future. So
yeah, it's a really interesting point. You know, do you think about retirement and pensions as right, when I've got enough money at age whatever it is, I'm going to stop and then we'll work? Or is it more, it's more grey than that? It's being able to wind down and being able to supplement, not have to earn so much money from doing work because you've got extra. How, maybe if you carry on with Claire, how do you sort of think about, or do you even think about what retirement looks like from that perspective?
I am thinking about it a lot more now. I'm 31, so I think throughout my 20s, retirement felt like a very, very long way away. And now I think part of it is like watching how quickly my children are growing up. It feels like the time's going really, really quickly. And I start to think kind of about what life looks like post sort of working as hard as you possibly can to earn as much as you possibly can. So I think probably, like you said before, I think I would probably do a phased retirement. I think it's everybody that I know who has retired and just stopped completely dead has then gone back to working part-time for at least a short amount of time. So I think the more important thing though is that my husband works a job with very long antisocial hours, and it does really eat into our time as a family. So I do know the real importance of time spent together and what it feels like to miss out on that. So I think essentially for me, like, retirement means buying more time to do things that I enjoy with the people that I love, basically.
Yeah. And Sian, what does retirement mean to you?
I think, I think Claire's just summed it up. It's buying time, isn't it? And perhaps I guess that's what you're doing with when you're saving for a pension. You're not focusing on the weekend and having the money to take a Friday or a Monday off. You're focusing on being able to take 6 months off when you're 60, something like that. You're pushing that time back somewhat. But I picture a lot of travel. I really do. And at the moment we're in a very kind of strange place because my husband has been freelance for the last 6 years, and he's now going back to work in a job full time. And we haven't had that in our relationship where he doesn't have that much control over his time. And it's a really strange thing to think, actually, now we can't just, no one can just go on holiday at the drop of a hat at the moment, but we've been very used to being in control of our time, and we won't get that opportunity for a while now. So it's that freedom. And I think, like Claire, I can't envisage me just stopping work one day. But the idea that I don't have to write an article for 150 quid is really, really appealing. I don't want to do the work I don't want to do anymore. Don't get me wrong, I love a lot of the jobs that I do, but I think it's freedom for me to work on my fiction, which, freedom to work, that's ridiculous, isn't it? But it's freedom to be creative in the way that I want to. I can't imagine stopping being creative. And there's always going to be something that I'm tinkering away on, but I want that to be my choice, not something I have to do.
Yeah, I think freedom is the key word, really, isn't it? It's freedom to do things where the sole purpose or the main purpose isn't necessarily making money. So whether that's travel or working on your passion projects or spending more time with the family. Lara, how about you? What does retirement mean to you, or anything different from what the others have been saying?
I think there's a bit of delay, by the way. So if there's a lot of time between you asking me a question and not speaking, apologies. But I'd echo exactly what Sian, Claire, and you were saying. I think it's having the freedom of choice to say, I'm now going to, I can afford to take the time off and spend it with the people I love. It's the freedom to make decisions based on passion and desires rather than fear. And I think when you're able to set yourself up and your future so that if you want to continue working, you can, and if you don't want to, you don't have to. I don't really have much more to add, to be honest. Like, I completely agree. You know, now more than ever, I think we're really aware of just how precious life is, and family and connections, community, being able to spend your precious time with the ones that you love. And I think, you know, being in lockdown, it's taught us that it is possible to enjoy your family's company 24/7, but also just how like precious that time is. And I know it's been a tragic year in many ways, but I think, you know, lockdown has taught us just how lucky we are to be able to spend such quality time with people that we love, for those who have been able to do that. And it's definitely given me an insight into what life could be like if there was more flexibility. You know, my husband works 5 days a week in London. Usually he would get up at 6 in the morning, he'd come back at 8. He now does the nursery drop off sometimes. He gets to come back at lunch and we hang out for an hour. We go to the beach and have a walk at 5:30. Like, life has drastically changed, and I don't know whether it's going to be like that next year and the year after. Maybe things will start to go back to normal. Hopefully it will never be the old normal. It will be a new normal. But it's made me realize just how important that time is, and having the freedom to be able to do that. And I think if you're working consistently because you can't afford to retire earlier, that's a really sad place to be. So yeah, I think it's having that freedom of choice, really.
Yeah. So I guess switching gears a little bit away from sort of the long term and pensions, and I'm sure as self-employed folks, you're all using a huge array of tools and services out there to manage your finances. I was wondering if you could give some, you know, tips on ones that you found to be the most useful. Maybe if we keep with you, Lara, and then we'll go back to the others.
Yeah, sure. So for me, Monzo has been great from a budgeting perspective, because I have been able to, especially as I've been increasing my pension, the amount I put into my pension every month, I've been able to say, okay, so this is how much I have left to spend on stuff versus stuff that I've got sort of, you know, financial commitments for, and that's been an amazing way of just seeing actually where I'm spending my money and what's general versus coffees versus food versus things that probably I should be spending less money on. So that's amazing from like a financial perspective. What else have I written here? Free Agent is my accountancy platform. And that's been, again, amazing, just to see sort of the breakdown of costs of my business, versus like how much I'm paying like in invoices versus how much I'm invoicing. And I think any platform that gives you that transparency and that breakdown, so that you don't have to do all the work, sort of when it comes to numbers, that's not an area that I've ever been very good at. I'd love to be better at. So I think platforms that make your life easier. And then, of course, I can't not mention Penfold. That's been amazing. It's been so nice to see my pension pot grow. And I know you haven't paid me to say this, but it is just so lovely to see everything in one place. The dashboard's super simple, and it really does only take a couple of minutes. And I think for me, that's been really nice, because as someone who's self-employed and has a kid, and you don't have time to even think about that kind of stuff, let alone put the time aside to set things like that up. So apps like that have just been, yeah, an absolute game changer.
Yeah, fantastic. And Sian, are there any tools that you can recommend? And you don't need to mention Penfold.
I've got a very kind of out of sight, out of mind approach to my savings. So I use an app called Plum. They take a small amount of money from my current account each week. It has just changed how I think about money, and it's made me realize that even when I'm in my overdraft, I can save. It paid off my overdraft, which was a phenomenal thing. I did use Chip for a while, but their marketing team was so unbelievably rude to me. I cancelled my account and moved, and I would never recommend them. But Plum is great. Plum now have an option that rounds up spending to each penny. I think Monzo does the same thing. But if you're with Lloyds Bank, they do it as well, and they will just take any kind of extra savings. So if you've spent $7.97 on something, they'll put that 3p into your savings account, and all of those little bits add up to so much more than you'd expect. I don't know why Lloyds Bank don't shout about that, because it's one of the best things they do. And one thing I did do, which you can do, it will vary from bank to bank. I have the smallest standing order that goes into my savings account, which I think when I started that it was £10. Now it's 15, and just that weekly money going into a savings account each week, you don't notice it, you don't see it. And I suspect there might be some of you in the kind of 50 people here who are just, if you try and save money at the end of the month, especially when you're self-employed, the best laid plans just go out of the window, and I'm much more likely to buy books because books are great. But if the money is going out of my account and I don't even see it, it's not there, which is why I can honestly say I've not logged into my Penfold account since I set it up. I don't care. I don't want to see the money. So I'm sure the dash top is brilliant, but all I know is the money going in. I've never seen it because I don't want to obsess over what's in it. I just need to know that my money is somewhere where I can't spend it. So I recommend all of those very, very small things.
That's some really good advice. And Claire, what about you? Any tools that you particularly like?
I mean, you might have noticed me like nodding my head off during while Sean was talking about Plum. I use it as well, and just the fact that it like siphons off small amounts. So I actually have referred like 500 people to Plum through my Frugal Year so far, and I get messages weekly from people being like, I've never ever saved before, and now I've got 600 quid in savings since the start of lockdown. And I think like if we talk about shame around debt, then there's also quite a lot of shame around not having enough in savings. And I think that, you know, breaking that barrier for people I think people consider themselves like not a saver. And I think breaking that barrier for people is really important. So yes, I use Plum. I always advocate having like a digital toolkit, so just like a little folder on your phone or whatever, which is all of your different money apps. So Lara mentions Monzo. I use Starling for my personal and business banking, and they have like a business toolkit, which is a bit like QuickBooks or another invoicing software, but it's directly attached to your bank account. So that's really great. You can create invoices, and it balances everything up for you. So I have literally, I'm about to launch a digital platform this week. So that's what I kind of have to deal with that. And then I also use QuickBooks for my like self-employed income, so all of my different like income streams, like writing, partnerships, things like that. And then I just use Google Sheets as well for my like monthly budget, and I can share it with my husband, so it's a shared document. So we can each put in our expenses. It factors in our income. It factors in the fact that I'm self-employed. So it's like weekly, and I can put in all of my invoices once they've been paid. And that I'm like the opposite of Sean. I'm obsessed with checking everything all the time. I think because
when it comes to how much I earn, I have a spreadsheet that goes out to savings. I don't want to know.
I think because I buried my head in the sand about my finances for such a long time, I'm now I really enjoy having visibility over it. And so, you know, I think seeing all of those amounts adding up and seeing how much my income has changed over time, and having full visibility of all of our expenditure all in one little folder on my phone is just, it's changed everything.
Yeah, I was going to go on to ask around, you know, if you had any more sort of top tips to make you feel more financially secure, and I guess that's possibly one of them, Claire. I mean, I don't know if you've got any other techniques or things that you do that make you feel a bit more confident in your finances.
I mean, I'm like really an advocate for like a holistic approach to financial well-being. So there are, you know, a few different pillars of that. I think in living with a budget is really a big one for me, and I think a lot of people think of a budget in terms of something that's like punitive or a short-term thing to achieve an end, and then you discard it, when actually all a budget is knowing what's coming in, knowing what's going out, and knowing what you're going to do with what's left over, having a plan for your money. So living with a budget, I think, for your confidence and your sort of sense of financial well-being is massive. And then also having kind of, I think especially this year, as everything has pivoted to online, to e-commerce rather than retail, having like a grip on your process, decision-making process for spending is really, really key. You know, I think the e-commerce industry is trying to remove any friction from the purchase process. So, you know, it becomes quicker and quicker to buy things. You can now buy things directly in Instagram. They remove clicks, you know, and I think what they're actually doing is removing all of the points where you might make the decision not to buy something. And so what we have to do now is put those back in. And that's, you know, you have to do that kind of manually by asking yourself those questions. But, you know, if you just do that a few times a month, then it makes a massive difference overall.
Yeah. And Sian, what about you? What do you do to feel more financially secure?
So I guess my advice is much more on a kind of a practical level for being self-employed, because it's so much about cash flow when you're self-employed. I won't work with clients who pay me late. If clients mess me around with money, I will stop that working relationship. And I've got very used now to not banking on promises and only spending money when it's in my account, rather than spending money that I think I'm going to get paid. And I think that's a really difficult thing to do when you're self-employed. And like, we all have very different relationships with our clients, but if you're working with a client who repeatedly pays you 3-4 months late, you just make it so much harder for yourself to be able to save and to be able to be in control of your finances. And I think it comes from being in a place where I had such a difficult relationship with my finances. I don't want other people to be in control of how I feel about that. So I take control of it myself, and I work really hard to make sure I have strong working relationships with my clients, but I will turn down work if it means that I'm not going to get paid on time. So that really helps me.
Yeah,
so
makes sense.
That was such a negative point to end on. Sorry, guys.
No.
I buy myself a lot of treats as well. I think Claire mentioned something that was really important, where she was really worried about people telling her off for buying coffee or something like that. And I think maybe it's because I save in small amounts, but just like, it's not good or bad spending money on stuff when you've earned that money. It's your money and you're allowed to spend it even if you're saving. And I think that relaxing about it a little bit more is a really nice thing to do.
Yeah, I think you need to enjoy the ride as well as think about the future.
Yeah.
And Lara, what about you? What do you do to feel financially secure?
Yeah, so just on Sian's previous point, it reminded me that I was once advised by someone, especially as women, we tend to undercharge. So whatever fee we feel comfortable charging, add 20%, and that's probably a more realistic fee to charge. And I also think, you know, if you feel like you're undercharging, you most probably are. So be really realistic as well about your worth, know your worth. And charge accordingly, because I think we're so eager to either please or not miss an opportunity. And as Sian says, you know, you are for most of you your own boss, and you should be able to say, actually, do you know what, I'm not going to work with you because you're either not paying me enough, you don't value my expertise, or you're not paying me on time. So I think that's a really important message and a really empowering one to remember. And just on a really basic level, knowing your financial situation. I know that we've touched on this throughout this whole conversation, but actually looking at everything. And I only did this fairly recently and looked at bank accounts, income, outgoing tax, financial commitments, how much my son's costing me, childcare, literally everything. And it was scary, but I actually slept the best night like I've ever slept after doing that. And it's because for the first time, no stone was left unturned, and I knew where I was. And it's actually not that scary because you're facing it, you're not ignoring something, and you tend to exaggerate things in your head. So if you're unsure about something, you tend to think it's way worse than it actually is. So I think actually knowing your financial situation, not digging your head in the sand, and being really honest about where you are, because even if you're starting from zero, you know where you're starting from, and then you can work towards a goal. And you can't do that unless you know where you're starting from.
Fantastic. That's really good advice from all of you. And I'm conscious we've only got a couple more minutes, and there's some questions that have been popping up from the group, but I just wanted to check from the three of you whether you have questions about pensions that you get asked a lot that maybe I can help answer while we're here before we open it up to the group. So, Sian, Lara, or Claire?
No. No, let's open it up.
Well, I don't know, Chris, I reckon open it up. I mean, we had quite a few questions yesterday when you came on to talk to our community, but it might make sense to see if anyone else has anything, and then we can always touch on those. But I think, it's been great to hear everyone else's experiences and to understand a bit more about, definitely.
Perfect, sounds good. So just looking at the question panel, I've seen one that says, from Emma, I have a few pensions from old jobs. Is there any easy way to collect these in one place now I'm freelance? Yes is the answer. It's very easy to do this. I mean, you could do it using Penfold, just entering the details of your old pension, but that's the difficult bit. It's finding or knowing the details of your old pension. Actually getting the process to happen is super quick, takes a few days, or 1 minute to upload and then a few days for the money to come. You need to have paperwork from your old pension provider, either by email or if you've got the record, and it'll have a policy number on it. If, like most people, you won't have kept paperwork from it, there are ways you can find it. So there's a tool that we can help you use, that where you put in who your employer was and what dates you worked there. It tells you who the pension provider was, and then we can just contact that pension provider and they'll give you the details to plug them in. So they're not lost, your money will be there, but it's often a good option to take the time to hunt these down and pull them together into one place before you sort of forget about them. Because I can imagine in sort of 30 years time thinking, where was that pension that I had when I worked in 2010? So there's another question. I'm 40 years from Victoria. I'm 40 years old, self-employed, and don't have a pension, which I regret. How do I know which pension is best for me in terms of risk, charges, and fees? There's no sort of straight answer for this. Obviously, we're biased and would say Penfold is good, but in that we try to make things as simple as possible to open a pension. But you can open a personal pension from a number of different providers. As I say, we try to make it as easy as possible to do that, but there's lots of other options on there. Going to somewhere like Money Supermarket is quite a good place to look at different options and look at what they cost, look at how your money is invested, and look at how much, I suppose, how easy it is to manage your money once you've opened it. So we found that a lot of providers make it quite difficult to change how much you're paying in. And obviously when you're self-employed and your income fluctuates a fair bit from month to month, or it can do, waiting 2 weeks to be able to cancel a contribution into your pension just isn't good enough. So we've tried to make that as easy as possible. In terms of risk, generally speaking, the earlier you are in your life, the more risk people tend to take more risk with the investments. And what that means is that it has more potential to grow over the long term. So risk sounds like a scary word, but is actually a positive thing. It basically means investing your money in things that could go up or down in value. But the beauty of the stock market is, even though money goes up and down in value in the short term, over the long term, on average, it tends to grow at a much, much greater rate than if you just left it in a bank account. So with a pension, you've got 30, 40 years to wait. And so putting your money when you're starting out in a higher risk vehicle means that it can grow for 10, 20 years. And then as you get a bit closer to retirement, you start to turn down the risk level because you've achieved that growth. And now it's more about protecting the money from short-term ups and downs. So hopefully that was helpful. I've got another, and sorry, we've overrun the 12 o'clock, but I'll keep going. And if you need to log off, go for it. But would you be able to briefly explain how Penfold works and why you personally recommend it for pensions? So I sort of mentioned why I would recommend it, ease of use and flexibility. It's go on our website and click get started. You have to enter just some basic details about yourself, choose the risk level that works for you based on sort of how old you are, quite frankly, and how long it's going to be until you retire, or if you want a more sustainable investment option, we've got that too. And then just decide how much to put in, and that's it. So super simple. A question from Bethan. I read something about how you need to contribute a certain number of years NI contributions at a minimum amount per year. So would this mean if I'm only earning 10k as a freelancer, I don't get a state pension in years to come? Yes, this is a really important point as a freelancer, that often, particularly if you have a limited company, you might lower your salary so that you don't pay national insurance or income tax and you take the rest in dividends. That's great, and that's a really good, sensible strategy. But because you're not paying national insurance, it means you might not be eligible for your full state pension. So I mentioned at the start that the government gives a £9,000 state pension to you once you hit age 68. But that's only if you've paid national insurance for 20 years. If you've paid it for 10 years, you get about half of that amount. So it's something to think about when you're setting the salary level that you choose, that it's sometimes better to pay some national insurance so that you qualify for the state pension. Yes, okay. The final question was just clarifying that point.
Powered through those questions, Chris. Wow.
I hope I didn't go too fast. Good. Well, we've overrun the time, so I just wanted to say thank you so much to our panel, to Sian, Clare, and Lara. That was really helpful, and I hope everyone who was here sort of found that useful too. Thanks for all your questions. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to sign up to Penfold if you're not a member already. Quote the code Talk Money in the reference code when you log on. And thanks again to everyone, and hope to speak to you all again soon.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry about my
Cheers, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.